Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. First up, some backstory. During my gap year between college programs in 2023, I decided to work for Company Z. Company Z was run by a husband, Mike, and wife, Jennifer, with their daughter, who basically treated their staff like a small family. All was well for about 2 months until I realized I had to ask for a day off since I wanted to attend the final Metallica concert the band would give in my country. There was about a month to go, so I sent an email asking for the day off and explaining why. This is where everything started to go downhill. I got a reply from Jennifer, and her reply was weird. She stated that's not how asking for a day off works. I was confused to say the least. What does she mean that's not how it works? I said to myself, staring at my screen. Not sure what to do, I thought she wanted a more formal way of asking, so I wrote a formal email requesting the day off. She shot an email back saying, "You really need to think through what you're doing here," which made even less sense to me. But I was hopeful since I never really got a specific no. The next workday rolls around. I arrived, locked up my bike, and headed inside, ready for work. I immediately started looking for Mike to ask for answers. Before I could even open my mouth, he asked me, "Do you still want to go to that concert?" I didn't expect him to ask this so quickly, answered, "Yes, it's their farewell tour, and—" "Okay," he interrupted. "Take off your vest and you can go home." I was stunned. And while the words started to sink in, I looked at my colleagues who were just preparing for opening. When it finally sank in, anger flowed in. I am not a confrontational person, so I simply took off my vest and gave it to Mike. "Is this for real?" I asked quietly. "Yes, it is," he replied coldly. "We don't need employees who prioritize concerts over work commitments." Without another word, I left and started biking home, the spring breeze doing nothing to cool my rising frustration. When I got back home, I told my mother what happened. "They can't just fire you for asking for a day off," she said, clearly upset. "That's not right." We started sending emails for extra information and got very Jennifer-like emails back. "Your son needs to understand workplace priorities," one email read. "This isn't a place where people can just take off whenever they want for entertainment." After a couple emails which went basically nowhere, I looked up the laws for immediate dismissal. After reading up about it, I learned that, in my country, somebody can only be immediately fired when caught stealing, committing fraud, the person isn't able to do the work, or refusal to do the work. I did none of these. A day or two later, I met with my attorney and began the steps to sue Company Z. "So they fired you on the spot just for asking for a day off to attend a concert?" my lawyer asked, looking surprised. "Yes, that's exactly what happened," I replied. I told my lawyer what happened in detail, and he was very confident I was in the right and Jennifer was not. So after trading even more emails between the three of us, we went to small claims. I came prepared in a suit with my attorney in tow, and Jennifer showed up alone. I guess she assumed she would win because she thought she was in her right. The trial began, and I was as professional and objective as I could be. Jennifer did the same. Well, for about half of the trial. "Can you show the court any policy that states employees cannot request days off for personal events?" the judge asked her. "Well, no, but it's common sense," Jennifer replied, her confidence starting to crack. When she realized evidence was piling up against her, she resorted to calling me a spoiled brat, among other things I don't know the English translation for. "Your Honor," she exclaimed, "this young person has no work ethic. He thinks he can just come and go as he pleases for some loud music concert." The judge cut her off. "Miss Jennifer, please stick to the facts of the case." I'm safe to say that was the point the judge ruled in my favor. As per usual, I had to wait a month before I got the verdict black on white in the mail. But I won. It may have taken about 6 months from the moment I was told to go home to the point those 6 months of pay were transferred to my bank account, but it was 100% worth it. "Congratulations," my mom said when the money finally came through. "You stood up for what was right." In the end, I went to the concert. It was in September 2023, and I'll never forget the moment they played Enter Sandman as the final encore. It was the most awesome and most profitable concert I have ever been to in my life. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened about 2 years ago, and I still can't believe how perfectly everything worked out. My mother-in-law has always been the type of person who thinks she knows what's best for everyone else, but this time she really crossed a line that landed her in handcuffs. So here's the background. I've got this old pickup truck that I inherited from my grandfather when he passed away. It's a beat-up old thing from the early 2000s, nothing fancy, but it runs decent enough and has tons of sentimental value. My grandfather taught me how to drive in that truck, and we used to go fishing every weekend in it when I was a kid. The paint is faded, There's some rust spots, and the interior has seen better days, but mechanically it's solid. I use it for hauling stuff around the house, picking up lumber for projects, and just general truck duties. My wife and I live in a decent neighborhood, and we park our cars in the driveway. My wife has her newer sedan, and I have my daily driver plus the old truck. The truck definitely sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the other vehicles on our street, but it's my property and it's not hurting anyone. Enter my mother-in-law. This woman has opinions about everything, and she's never shy about sharing them. From day one, she's made comments about that truck. Every time she visits, without fail, she'll make some remark about how it's bringing down the neighborhood, how it makes us look poor, how we should just get rid of it and buy something nice. My wife usually just rolls her eyes and changes the subject, but I can tell it bothers her when her mom gets on these rants. The comments escalated over time. What started as little snide remarks became full lectures about property values and neighborhood standards. She'd go on about how the neighbors must think we're trashy, how it reflects poorly on my wife, how a man my age should have better things. I tried to explain the sentimental value, but she'd just wave me off and say that keeping junk for emotional reasons was childish. Things came to a head during a family barbecue we hosted. My mother-in-law had apparently been stewing about the truck situation and decided this was the perfect time to make her big speech. She pulled me aside and told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to get rid of that eyesore. She said it was embarrassing her daughter, that the neighbors had been complaining to her about it, and that if I really cared about my wife's reputation, I'd do something about it immediately. I tried to stay calm and explain that it was my truck parked on my property and that I had no intention of getting rid of it. That's when she really lost it. She started yelling about how I was being selfish and stubborn, how I was putting my dead grandfather's memory above my living wife's feelings. She demanded that I either sell it or donate it within the week, or she'd find a way to deal with it herself. My wife came over and managed to calm things down, but the damage was done. My mother-in-law spent the rest of the evening making passive-aggressive comments and giving me the cold shoulder. When she left, she made sure to tell me that this wasn't over and that she expected to see some action on the truck situation soon. I figured she was just blowing off steam and would forget about it eventually. Boy, was I wrong. The next week, I was at work when I got a call from my neighbor. He said there was a strange woman in my driveway taking pictures of my truck and writing stuff down. When he asked if she needed help, she told him she was handling some business for the family. I immediately knew it was my mother-in-law, but I wasn't sure what she was up to. I found out soon enough. That evening, my wife got a call from her mom, who was all excited about how she'd found the perfect solution to our truck problem. She'd apparently spent the day researching the truck's value and had decided to list it for sale online. She was calling to let us know that she'd already posted ads on several websites and had gotten some interest from potential buyers. My wife was stunned. She asked her mom what she meant, and my mother-in-law explained it like she was doing us a huge favor. She'd taken photos, written up a description, and listed the truck for what she considered a fair price. She said she'd handle all the negotiations and paperwork, and we could just split the money with her for all her hard work. That's when I took the phone. I told her in very clear terms that she had no right to sell my truck and that she needed to take down those ads immediately. She got defensive and said she was just trying to help, that I was being unreasonable, and that someone needed to take charge of the situation since I clearly wasn't going to handle it myself. I demanded she remove the listings, but she refused. She said the truck was going to be sold one way or another, and I could either cooperate and make it easy, or she'd find another way to make it happen. When I told her that would be theft, she laughed and said I was being dramatic. After all, she was family, and she was just trying to help us out of a bad situation. The next morning, I woke up to find several people in my driveway looking at the truck. Apparently, my mother-in-law had scheduled showings without telling us. I went outside and had to explain to these confused potential buyers that the truck wasn't actually for sale and that there had been a misunderstanding. They weren't happy, and I felt terrible for wasting their time. I called my mother-in-law immediately and told her this had to stop. She was unapologetic and said she'd already had several serious inquiries. She informed me that she had a cash buyer coming to look at it that afternoon and that she expected me to be cooperative. When I said absolutely not, she said fine, she'd handle it herself. That afternoon, I made sure to be home early from work. Sure enough, around 3 o'clock, I saw my mother-in-law's car pull up, followed by a pickup truck with a trailer. I watched from my window as she got out with some guy and started showing him around my truck. They popped the hood, kicked the tires, and were clearly serious about making a deal. I went outside and interrupted their little inspection. The buyer was confused when I introduced myself as the actual owner and said the truck wasn't for sale. My mother-in-law got angry and tried to explain that there had been a family discussion and that I was just being difficult. The poor guy was caught in the middle and didn't know what to believe. After he left, my mother-in-law and I had it out right there in the driveway. She accused me of sabotaging her efforts to help and said I was being childish and ungrateful. I told her that if she didn't stop trying to sell my truck, I'd call the police. She laughed and said I'd never do that over something so stupid, and that she was going to keep trying until she found a buyer who could close the deal quickly. That's when she made the threat that sealed her fate. She looked me dead in the eye and said that if I kept interfering with her sales efforts, she'd just find a buyer who could come get the truck when I wasn't home. She had taken detailed photos and measurements, and she was confident she could find someone willing to just show up with cash in a trailer. She said possession was 9/10 of the law, and once the truck was gone, there wouldn't be anything I could do about it. I was furious, but I kept my cool. I told her that if she really believed that, then she should go ahead and try. After all, she seemed so confident that she had the right to sell my property, so why should I keep standing in her way? She seemed surprised that I was backing down so easily, but she was also pleased that she'd finally gotten through to me. She left that day convinced that she'd won. Over the next few days, she called my wife several times with updates on her sales progress. She'd found a buyer who was willing to pay her asking price in cash, and they were planning to pick up the truck the following Saturday while I was at work. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. My mother-in-law was absolutely convinced that she had every right to sell my truck. She'd made it clear that she considered it her business to handle, that she thought I was being unreasonable for objecting, and that she was going to follow through regardless of what I said. She wanted to treat my truck like it was hers to dispose of, so I decided to let her face the full legal consequences of that position. Saturday morning came, and I called in sick to work. I parked my car down the street where it couldn't be seen from my house, and I waited. Around 10 o'clock, my mother-in-law showed up with two guys in a pickup truck pulling a car trailer. I watched from my neighbor's yard as they backed the trailer up to my truck and started loading it up. My mother-in-law was directing the whole operation, clearly feeling very pleased with herself. She had a folder with what looked like paperwork and was explaining something to the buyers. They got the truck loaded onto the trailer, tied it down, and she handed them the keys she'd somehow gotten copied. That's when I called 911. I explained to the dispatcher that someone was stealing my truck from my driveway. I gave them my address and a description of what was happening. They said officers were on the way and told me to stay back and not confront the thieves directly. The timing was perfect. Just as the buyers were getting ready to pull away with my truck, two police cars pulled up and blocked them in. The officers got out and immediately started asking questions. I came out of my hiding spot and identified myself as the homeowner and truck owner. The buyers were confused and showed the officers their paperwork, which my mother-in-law had apparently forged with some kind of bill of sale. My mother-in-law tried to explain that this was all a family misunderstanding and that she had permission to sell the truck. The officers asked to see her identification and proof of ownership. That's when things got really interesting. I showed the officers my truck title, registration, and insurance documents, all clearly showing me as the sole owner. My mother-in-law couldn't produce any legal documentation giving her the right to sell my property. When the officers asked her directly if she had gotten written permission from me to sell the truck, she admitted that she hadn't, but insisted that it was implied. The lead officer was very professional but firm. He explained that regardless of family relationships, selling someone else's property without their permission is theft. He asked me directly if I had authorized the sale, and I clearly stated that I had not. I explained that I had specifically told her multiple times not to sell the truck, and that she had threatened to do it anyway. The officers arrested my mother-in-law right there in my driveway. They put her in handcuffs, read her rights, and loaded her into the back of the police car. The buyers were released after it was clear they were innocent victims of fraud, but they had to unload my truck and leave it in my driveway where it belonged. The whole neighborhood came out to watch the show. My mother-in-law was screaming about how this was all a misunderstanding and how she couldn't believe I'd called the police on family. She kept yelling that she was just trying to help and that I was ruining everything over a stupid truck. The officers impounded her car as evidence and told me I'd need to come down to the station to file a formal complaint. They explained that she was being charged with attempted grand theft auto and fraud. Since the truck was worth over a certain amount, it was a felony. My wife came home right in the middle of all this chaos. She was shocked to see her mother being arrested in our driveway, but when I explained what had happened, she was more angry at her mom than at me. She'd had no idea that her mother had planned to actually follow through on the theft threat. The legal aftermath was swift and severe. My mother-in-law spent the weekend in jail because she couldn't make bail. When she finally got out, she had to hire a lawyer and deal with the criminal charges. The case was pretty open and shut since she'd admitted to the officers that she didn't have permission to sell the truck. Her lawyer tried to work out a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in being lenient. Apparently, my mother-in-law had a history of boundary issues and minor legal problems, so this wasn't her first run-in with the law. She ended up pleading guilty to attempted theft and fraud charges. The judge sentenced her to 6 months of supervised probation, community service, and ordered her to pay restitution for all the legal costs I incurred. She also had to attend court-ordered counseling for boundary and anger management issues. The whole ordeal cost her thousands of dollars in lawyer fees and fines. But the best part was the restraining order. As part of the plea agreement, she was prohibited from coming onto my property or contacting me directly for 2 years. She could only communicate with my wife and only about family emergencies. The truck is still sitting in my driveway, and it's never looked better to me. I actually ended up spending some money to fix up the cosmetic issues, partly out of spite and partly because the whole experience made me appreciate it even more. It's got a fresh paint job now, and the interior has been reupholstered. It looks great, and every time I see it, I remember how perfectly my mother-in-law's plan backfired. My wife's relationship with her mother has been strained ever since, but honestly, that's been a blessing. We don't have to deal with her constant criticism and boundary violations anymore. Family gatherings are much more peaceful without her there trying to control everyone and everything. The neighbors all know the story now, and they actually think it's hilarious. A few of them have complimented me on how nice the truck looks since I fixed it up. Turns out nobody ever had a problem with it except my mother-in-law. The whole experience taught me an important lesson about dealing with people who refuse to respect boundaries. Sometimes you have to let them face the full consequences of their actions instead of trying to protect them from themselves. My mother-in-law was so convinced that she knew better and had the right to override my decisions that she was willing to commit actual crimes to get her way. When someone tells you they're going to do something illegal, sometimes the best response is to just let them do it and call the appropriate authorities. She wanted to act like my truck was hers to sell, so I let her discover what happens when you try to sell someone else's property without permission. The legal system handled the rest. Looking back, I probably could have prevented the whole thing by being more confrontational earlier on, but I'm glad I didn't. This way, she learned a lesson that will stick with her for the rest of her life, and I got to keep my truck exactly where I wanted it. Sometimes malicious compliance really is the most satisfying form of justice. The next one is a petty revenge story. So my dad is a preacher and my mom does Sunday school. Any other PKs will know that means I was never allowed to win judge contests at church, like pumpkin carving. If I found the golden egg at Easter, I had to put it back so someone else could get it, and I never got the solos in choir unless no one else wanted it, because my parents were afraid the other parents would think they were just giving me things I don't deserve, even if my pumpkin was the best or I was the only one who was even singing in choir. Afterward, my parents would always take me and my sister out for a treat if something like that happened. We just weren't recognized publicly. I was 13 or 14, and we were working on a song for Easter that had some pretty low notes. There wasn't a solo, but my mom had me closest to the microphone since I was the only one who could hit the notes most of the time, and they pointed the speakers back at us so the others could hear me and hopefully adjust their pitch. Karen's daughter was a little younger than me, and she could sing nice, but she was a high soprano and couldn't hit the lower notes. She had gotten not one, but 2 solos in the Christmas play. One during one of the songs with everyone else, the other was her singing alone while I played the piano. During our song, you could barely hear her. She was off key and off tempo with my playing because she refused to take the music home with her to practice. Anyway, Karen walks in and watches for the rest of the rehearsal. After a bit, when Mom thinks everyone's got the hang of it, she has me move to my normal spot, in the back middle, so everyone could hear me during the actual performance. This tends to happen often with young country kids with little to no singing experience. And we continue as normal. Karen's daughter is about 2 people to the left of the mic and still isn't able to hit the low notes, but everyone else is doing okay. We've got one more rehearsal before we have to sing this in church, so we should be fine. I wasn't there for this part, but apparently Karen approached my mom after and asked why I had the solo and not her daughter, who was obviously way more talented than me. Mom explained that I didn't have a solo, that there wasn't even a solo for this song, and that I was just singing into the mic so everyone else could get the hang of the song. Karen asked why she didn't have her daughter sing into the mic because she's a better singer than me. Now, I don't claim to be an amazing singer, but I've been in several choirs that I've gotten solos in. I usually get picked for the short solos entitled Kids Think They're Too Good For, or the director hears me during rehearsal and realizes I'm the only one actually changing the way I sing when he gives constructive criticism and rewards me with the only solo during the Veterans Day program. Love you, Mr. C. My point is, I'm not a bad singer. My mom explains that Karen's daughter couldn't hit the lower notes and was struggling with this song. I just want to reiterate that this was a week and a half before we have to sing in church. There is one more rehearsal left. Karen: well then just have them do a song daughter can sing. You can't have them do hard songs just so my name can feel better about herself. My mom, being the good pastor's wife she is, calmly tells her that the songs were actually picked out by Karen's mother, that the kids have already learned the song, and that Karen is welcome to take the CD home with her so her daughter can practice. Karen gets mad and tells her to just give her daughter a full song like she did at Christmas. My mom explains that the only reason her daughter had that solo was that a lot of people wanted me to play the piano since they had never heard me play, and I didn't want to do it myself because I was afraid people would think I was getting special treatment for being the pastor's kid. Not such an irrational fear now, huh, Dad? Karen scoffs. If she can't even play that silly song alone, why did you give her the solo? Singing is way harder than piano, and she shouldn't have the solo if she has stage fright. My mom is mad at this point and again explains that I didn't have the solo for Easter, that it was only for today's rehearsal, and that I didn't have stage fright. There weren't any solos for the Easter songs, and the daughter wouldn't be able to learn it in time at this point. Everyone else is gathering in the sanctuary to do the benediction, so Karen shuts up for the time being. The next week, the daughter comes in with some song lyrics and says her mom wants her to sing it on Sunday. This was Thursday. I'm looking over her shoulder, and not knowing what had happened last week, I mentioned that I think that song is in my piano book. Since we go straight from my piano lessons to church, I look, and I do have it. Since Karen hadn't sent a CD, my mom just smiles and tells the daughter that she can sing it, and I would play the piano with it. I run through it alone a few times while everyone else is eating dinner, and then we go through it together after we had gone through all the other songs. Karen comes in and sees us rehearsing together and starts talking loudly to my mom, which makes me mess up, having learned this song in about 10 minutes. I stop and Karen starts saying that her daughter deserved a solo to herself and shouldn't have to share the spotlight with a spoiled brat who can't even play. My mom calmly points out the obvious, that Karen distracted me and that I was doing very well considering how fast I had learned the song. She then tells me and the daughter to run through it again. As we do, the grandmother walks in and comments on how she was excited to hear me play again and that we sounded amazing. If you've ever met a Southern mom, you know you don't get mad at someone else when your mom's in the room unless you're 110% sure she will side with you. Karen backed off and pouted for the rest of the night. Her daughter was supposed to be staying with one of the other church kids that night since we were out of school the next day for Good Friday, which means Karen left at the same time as her mother and couldn't say anything about it. Easter Sunday comes and the same thing that occurred at Christmas happened. I had practiced nonstop for 2 days so I would be perfect, and Karen's daughter sounded like she hadn't practiced since Thursday, which she probably hadn't. I noticed that during the group songs, the microphone was a lot closer to us than usual, which meant instead of everyone being about the same distance from the mic, I was about 6 inches to a foot closer than everyone else. I listened to someone's recording later, and you could hear me ever so slightly louder than everyone else. I'm 99% sure that was on purpose. Way to go, Mom. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work at a niche retail store located in the heart of town. Our customers are dedicated and often travel from afar just to visit us, so having a clear and accessible parking lot is crucial for our business. Unfortunately, our next-door neighbors, a family-run landscaping and garden supply store, have been a thorn in our side for years when it comes to parking. The tension between my boss and the landscaping store owner goes back over a decade before I joined, all over something trivial. I know the landscaper once complained about a tree on our side of the lot, which was unsightly for their customers. It was the pettiest neighbor drama you could imagine, but it festered for years. The final straw came after the Rona, when the physical business in town started picking back up and our parking lot started overflowing with cars again, many belonging to the landscaping store's customers. See, our two parking lots are connected. Ours is about twice the size of his, but the landscaper had decided to reserve almost all his spots for his landscaping vans. Ironically, those vans are rarely even there during business hours. As a result, his customers just parked in our lot, leaving us with few spaces for our own customers. My boss, trying to be reasonable, approached the landscaper with a suggestion. Maybe they could adjust their parking setup to free up a few more spaces for customers, and that their vans were welcome to park in our lot if their lot was ever full. But the landscaper shot down the idea immediately, insisting that it was absolutely crucial to reserve all of those spaces for his vans, even though they were rarely there during the day. The conversation turned heated, ending with my boss threatening to put up a fence to separate the lots and enforce parking. The landscaper, practically daring him, shot back, "Go ahead," probably knowing how expensive that would be. As you can imagine, it ended with both men storming off and not speaking for 2 years. Typical neighbor stuff. Fast forward to recently, and we got a golden opportunity when a parking management company approached us with a proposal. They offered to install automated license plate cameras to enforce parking, allowing us to find vehicles that stayed beyond a generous 3-hour free window if they hadn't paid. The setup would be free, we'd get most of the revenue, and they would keep any fines issued. It was perfect, especially since we were losing spaces to freeloaders. Wouldn't really impact the customers of the nearby stores, and if anyone had a good reason to park there for longer, then we could give them an extension at our discretion. However, for the cameras to work, they needed to cover both our entrance and the landscaping store's entrance. Being the considerate neighbor, again, my boss had the parking company rep reach out to the landscaper to explain the deal and benefits. But true to form, the landscaper didn't even let the rep finish before kicking him out, making it very clear that, under no circumstances, would his lot become a paid parking zone. Instead of going through the hassle of putting up the necessary expensive fence, my boss had a better idea. Big rocks. One of his construction buddies had a stash of leftover rocks from a recent project and offered to place them for a great price. The parking company even agreed to front the cost, to be repaid through future parking revenue. On Monday morning, before opening hours, one of the buddy's employees, a big burly guy with arms like tree trunks, arrived with a truck and crane to place the rocks. The rocks were neatly spaced to allow pedestrians to pass with carts, but completely blocked vehicle access. The landscaper stormed out, yelling and trying to intimidate the worker into stopping. But the worker, unfazed, calmly told him to step back for his own safety, which made the much smaller landscaper back down and retreat in frustration. The rocks weren't just a physical barrier, they quickly became a mental obstacle for the landscaper's employees. Their muscle memory kept bringing them into our lot, only for them to realize too late that they couldn't drive through anymore. We watched from our newly installed surveillance cameras, just in case the neighbor tried anything, trying not to burst out laughing as their vans ended up awkwardly stuck. They'd have to reverse out and go all the way around to their own entrance, only to perform a series of painful maneuvers to squeeze into their now much smaller parking area. At one point, we even caught one of their rushing vans clipping a rock while trying to maneuver. A little bonus for our viewing pleasure. The next day, the parking company arrived to install the license plate cameras and set up the signage, which took a few hours. Throughout the installation, the landscaper's family members were prowling around our lot, snapping photos and videos as if they were on a mission to find a violation, but the parking company was very professional and had done everything by the book, so there was nothing for them to report. In the meantime, my boss was positively glowing with satisfaction as he helped direct the installation. Here's the best part. We noticed that the neighbor's family had started parking their personal vehicles in our lot, likely out of spite to mess with us. One day, my coworker saw one of the family members dash out of their store and sprint to their car. We thought it was odd at the time, but didn't think much of it until the following week, when the landscaper's son came into our store looking a bit embarrassed. Apparently, he had accidentally overstayed the 3-hour limit and received a $150 fine. The son practically begged us to waive it, insisting it was just a simple mistake. My boss politely responded, "Oh, I'd really love to help, but it's out of our control now. The parking company handles all the fines." The look on his face was priceless. He left, shoulders slumped, retreating back to their store. Ever since, our lot has been blissfully clear, and our customers have had no trouble finding spaces. Meanwhile, the landscapers have been grumbling as they have a harder time maneuvering their vans, still trying to pretend they're not bothered. As for my boss, he's been smiling a lot more lately. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting people get exactly what they asked for. The next one is an entitled people story, so a bit of general info that I promise is relevant to the story. This encounter took place a solid 15 or so years ago in a Swedish-speaking region of Finland that sees a lot of Swedish tourists every summer, and since people speak Swedish, they often don't really remember they are in another country. There are, however, two important differences to this story. Finland uses euro, and Sweden uses Swedish crowns, SEK. The exchange is about 10 SEK = 1 euro. There is also a 1h time difference where Finland is 1h ahead of Sweden. So, to the actual story. At this point, I was working at a park that has animals you can go visit, but you can't just go freely inside the park since the animals roam the entire park area. You can only enter on a guided tour, and they start every hour on the hour. In front of the park, there is a small shop where you can buy tickets as well as some souvenirs and some snacks and such. This day I was on shop duty when this lady that may or may not be named Karen, she did have the haircut, walks up to the shop and wants to buy 4 tickets to the next tour, 2 adults and 2 children. At this point, adult tickets wear 8 euro and children wear 5 euro, so I tell her that will be 26 euro. She looks slightly confused and says she thought the price was 6 SEK per person. I proceed to tell her that no, that is not the price, and I point to the price list clearly displayed right next to the shop window. Well, this was apparently not the correct answer, so Karen starts telling me that our website says it's 6 sec, so I will have to sell her the tickets for 6 sec. This has me a bit confused, but I know the website has the correct prices on it since I looked at it just the other day, and the website absolutely would not have the price in sec since we use euro. I tell Karen this much, but she was not having any of it. She proceeds with the expected shouting, berating, threatening to call the police, and so on. I tried to ask her to show me the website where we had the price she claimed, but that was apparently not her duty. After getting nowhere fast with me, she says she wants to talk to the manager. At this point, I have had it, and I simply tell her that the manager doesn't want to talk to her, and I want her to either pay for her tickets or get out of my face. At this point, she swears we will be hearing from her, and she walks off. I know the owner and the manager and have for a very long time. I know the manager didn't want to talk to her. I, however, called the manager just to let her know what happened in case Karen calls her. At this point, I thought the ordeal was over, but an hour or so later, Karen shows up again with the smuggest look on her face. She has managed to find our website with the price on it, and she shows me her phone screen. The website she is on is not in fact our website, it is some random person's personal blog page. And on this blog page, there is a scan of a local tourism agency flyer with some prices for things in the area. Thing is, the post is 6 years old, and so is the image. And the price list didn't have any currency displayed at all, just 6. So, this was the price for an adult ticket from 6 years ago that someone has posted on some blog. And how Karen managed to find this, I have no clue. And when I explained to her that it's not our website and we have no control over some random blog, and that she will still have to pay the regular ticket price, she absolutely loses it and just stands there screaming at me and threatening me with everything she could imagine. I was a terrible person. We were lying and tricking people. We had to take responsibility for the information about us that is on the internet. She was going to call the police and she was going to sue us and so on and so forth. She again demanded to talk to the manager, and I told her I had talked to the manager, and the manager did in fact not want to talk to her. Eventually she storms of a second time. The last tour of the day starts at 15 o'clock and comes back a bit before 16 o'clock. We always keep the shop open until the last tour comes back in case the people on the tour wants to grab some souvenirs or something from the shop after the tour. At around 15:30, she shows up again, this time with husband and kids in tow. She is fuming, but I guess the kids were really wanting to go, so they convinced her. Anyway, she now says she will buy the tickets and sue us later to get the money back. Well, thing is, Karen, that the last tour for the day has left. You can come back tomorrow. The first tour starts at 10 o'clock. I thought she was angry before, but at this point I was kind of scared she would have a heart attack or something. She was bright red and screaming at the top of her lungs that it says on the timetable right there the last tour leaves at 15 o'clock. Well, it turns out her clock is on Swedish time. Well, this was of course also not acceptable that we didn't inform her we ran on local time. She stood there with her embarrassed-looking family until the tour came back. She yelled at me, the guide, and the other guests that we had to do a tour for her or she would call the police and probably the King of Sweden or whatever. Well, we closed up shop with her screaming at us, and eventually the husband managed to get her to come along and leave. The manager and owner both laughed so hard when we met up a few days later, and I told them both the entire story. Anyway, thank you for watching.